This is a pre-briefing on a budget address that's going to take place at 2 o'clock today. So I don't know how it works, but to the extent that we're hoping to keep this as an informational pre-awareness session, I think this is how we'd like to treat it. Does that seem reasonable? Is that what we've done in the past?
Usually it's on the records in Parliament.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you, Peter. Is that okay with everybody? Mm-hmm. All right, good. So, what we thought we'd do is sort of walk through the high level, some of the major proposals that we have in our budget to bring us into balance and allow for questions. We do have some of the secretaries and commissioners of some of the maybe of parts of the budget that you may be interested in. We have Secretary Racine with us from the Agency of Human Services. We have Secretary Searles from Transportation. We have Commissioner Oberhowski and Wanda Manoli from Buildings and General Services. We've got an interesting capital budget this year. We have Sue Allen, Matt Riven is our state budget director, and Bill Lopi is the chief of staff. Where did Sue go? Sue Zeller. Sue Zeller. Sue's and Sue. Sue Allen, President. Sue Zeller, Deputy Commissioner of Finance. So let's get started. And I think if I could, just to tell a story, if I ask you to go to page 3, you'll sort of get the sort of overview of where we are. The green line, the solid green line, and the solid blue line are actual, general fund, are specific non-ARA assisted general fund expenditures going from FY06 and then projected out through 15. And the blue is the revenue forecast, the revenues and forecast as adjusted for the most recent revenue forecast. And as you can see, there's a couple things here, and there's some other good charts that you'll see later. That our state revenues are for 12 going to be almost back to where they were in 2008. You could even say they're roughly getting back to where they were in 2008. So actually, there's two sides of that story. One is the good news that we're heading in the right direction, but you can see the squeeze because we're now getting back to general fund and going forward without ARA funds to where we were in 2008. So that's a challenge. The dotted line is actual general fund plus ARA spending. So this is, what I call is like general fund equivalent spending. And what we can see here is that when you actually added in the ARA funds, our general fund equivalent spending was continuing to go up, although not rapidly in the fiscal year in right now. And we have, looking forward this year, before we take our actions, a number of upward pressures of like 120 million. When you look in the fact that in the previous year there were ARA funds that were used to support education in terms of the general fund transfer to the education fund that we've got to make up. There's we're losing $120 million in ARA funds alone in the agency in the area of human services. And we had significant upward pressures in human services in terms of caseload utilization. You'll see those when we run through them. But even with all those increases of over $120 million of upward pressures, state spending, general fund or general fund equivalent spending is going down 25 million in FY12. And this is the first time that a budget is actually declining from the previous year in at least a decade. So we're making some pretty difficult decisions there. And if I could get you to go to page 5, we'll walk through. Really first, I think, Jim, why don't I let you do this since you're the most adept at this, but you'll basically can see what our starting point is, what the upward pressures are, and then in the red down towards the bottom, what our recommended actions are.
Can I just ask them to quickly go to page 22 first, so we can tell them where that 25 million is?
Yep.
Sure.
So it's 25 million in general fund.
General fund and general fund equivalent. If you go to page 22, I'll explain that to you. It's the general fund summary. You'll note in the governor's recommended 11 column, you go down to the uses, and our budget adjustment recommendation, our base spending, including general fund and ERA, is $1,255,000,000.
Hang on, Jim, I don't see that.
On page 22,
Okay.
and the governor's it's the third column.
Big one up.
You're saying total uses?
No, just the base uses. There's
I see.
one-time funding, and really the comparison is base spending. Is you got a $1,255,000,000. You see that number? That includes our general fund appropriations plus our general fund equivalent ERA appropriations, of which rely on about $158 million in that particular number. And you go over to the governor's recommended base spending for FY 2012, it's about $1,229,000,000. So when you compare our base general fund spending and general fund equivalent ERA funds, and you compare that to the general fund recommendation for 2012, you're down about $25 million in base spending.
And the 158 that he mentioned in ARA funds there, you know, which I round to 160 for my own thinking, I mentioned it. What makes putting this budget together difficult is that, you know, we've already made a lot of difficult decisions. When I mean we, I mean the former legislature and governor. We have, you know, at the end of the last fiscal year, as you know all this, 660 fewer state employees than we had 2 years ago. You know, state employees have taken a 3% pay cut. You know, the judiciary has just restructured itself. You can look around state government, and there are lots of decisions that have already been made. And you know, we'll talk more about it as we get into it a little further here. We have not achieved all of the targeted savings for challenge and change, but we have accomplished some significant restructuring and efficiencies in state government as a result of pushing hard there. But when you recognize that and then look at where the lost ARA revenues are, it's hard to not come to a conclusion that you can't make up for those reductions without going to the area where those reductions are coming from, which is the Agency of Human Services. Now, that's a big agency. We'll talk about a number of the actions that we're recommending in that area. But to try to accomplish, you know, to make up for those losses in revenues plus the upward pressures in somewhere else in state government is just an impossible exercise. So, you know, it's not like we want to go to the Agency of Human Services necessarily, but there's no other way to present a balanced budget without it, and we are presenting a balanced budget for FY12.
Quick question, just.
Now, we're going to let you ask this one question, and then and we want to make plenty of time for questions. We want to make sure we sort of before we get too far off track, we'd like to have a chance to go through it. So go ahead.
Well, you were talking about the $25 million reduction, right?
Yeah.
If I look at the chart on page 3 and I see where FY11 spending was, general fund plus ERA,
Yeah.
and I see where you're coming down to in 2012,
Right.
that decline is more than $25 million. So, am I missing something there?
Yeah, because the decline, yeah, I think we are, and I think it has to do with the ERA funds.
Is that the general fund equivalent?
Yeah, that includes the ERA, but that includes, Bob, that on the significant difference is the comparison I just gave you on page 22. And Sue Zeller, you need to listen carefully to this, is base to base. Here is a reflection of all uses, which includes one-time FY 2011 money. If you go to page 22 again, if you take all of our one-time money, you take the 1152, did you see that, all uses? It
Okay.
includes all of our uses.
Okay.
It includes, you have to add back the year of 158 to that we're using, and you've got to add any one-time transfers down below. So when you add all of that up, you do get to a much higher number than what I just gave you here. Because the chart on page 3 includes all uses and not just base appropriations.
So if we could go to page 5 and start working our way through what the upward pressures are and then what the actions are. And as you can see, you'll see what the majors are.
Go ahead, step us down through it. Is projected revenue is about $1,209,000,000. That's also includes the January 2011 consensus forecast on the general fund of $1,183,000,000. So the total available revenues are about $1,200,000,000 that we have to work with. Our 2011 base general fund appropriations and transfers is about $1.1 billion. So what we do here, folks, is we step up to what our total upward pressures are, and then we step down. Let me give you the 3 buckets of where we have upward pressures. We have base pressures of about $109 million. We have the lost federal funding due to changes in the global commitment waiver and the annual changes in our federal financial participation rate, which means we'll lose additional federal funding exclusive of ERA of nearly $17 million. We then are in 2011 using general fund equivalent ERA base funding of $158 million that will not be available in 2012. When you take those 3 upward pressures, you have total upward pressure on the budget of about $284 million. You compare that to our current revenue forecast of $1,200,000,000. It gives you a gap or a shortfall of $176 million. Ironically, just to go to a point that the Secretary of Administration stated about the real challenge of stepping down from the ERA money from 2011 to 2012, if you take the loss of federal money from the federal financial participation rate and the global commitment waiver, which is about $17 million, and you take the $158 million of ERA money that we were using as general fund equivalent base, that's $175 million. So one could conclude that a lot of the 2012 shortfall or budget gap is in large part due to the fact that we are stepping down from the federal funds, and the general fund has not been growing sufficiently to replace that lost federal funding. With that,
Yeah, so now we're gonna I'm gonna repeat a couple of the major first step downs, and then I think we probably need to spend the most time is in the human services area. You'll see the big number of actions for human services, 110. And I'm gonna hit the other ones first, because there's really not much new there. There's one small one that's new, but you'll remember back in December, at the time the governor-elect, now the governor met with and had a press conference and in cooperation with educational leaders and legislative leaders, said, 1, we are not going to ask to have the local spending targets under challenge for change imposed on school districts. 2, we are going to reduce the general fund transfer by the 23.2 target that we had. And 3, we're gonna use the 19 million of federal funds. So you'll see down in the red there, the 23.18. That's the reduction in the general fund transfer. So that's a piece of the step down now. Right above that, you'll see two